In today's episode, we're going to show you how to use guest interviews as a podcast marketing strategy. Welcome to Podcasting Q&A, where you learn the best tips and strategies to launch, grow, and monetize your show. When it comes to marketing your podcast, having guest interviews is a significant way to increase your podcast's reach. So in this episode, we're going to give you some examples of how to do just that. When it comes to choosing a podcast guest for marketing purposes, you want to think about a couple of things. The first thing to be mindful of is to choose a guest whose audience is pretty similarly aligned with your own. This allows you to have access to a group of people that might be interested in your content that you just haven't had access to. They don't know you exist just yet. But when you bring a guest on, you get access to their audience as well. So when you're thinking about bringing someone onto your podcast, you kind of want to imagine the ideal listener and make sure that that person would be listening to their podcast as well as be interested in your podcast. The second thing to be mindful of is choosing a quality, reputable guest to bring on your podcast. This is important because when you bring anyone onto your podcast, it's kind of like a cosign. You're saying, hey guys, I usually talk to you and I pull on amazing people. This is a person that I endorse as an amazing person. You just want to be mindful that your values align because your audience has come to expect something specific from you. And so you want to make sure whoever you bring on is going to have the same sort of value, same sort of quality that they've come to know and expect from you as well. So these have been really great things to be mindful of just when you're picking a guest. But the only way this will work as a podcast marketing strategy is to ensure that your podcast guest actually shares the content. So what I like to do when I have podcast guests on is I have kind of like a write-up that I send to give expectations and all of that good stuff. And I always say, hey, can you make sure you send a picture that you'd be comfortable with me sharing on socials for the episode promotional? And the really big thing is most of the people that I have on my podcast are really excited about being on the podcast. There are some people that are like, hey, I'm doing this, but my story is kind of whatever. I'm not quite sure that I'll share it. And those are kind of conversations that we have on the front end. And if I'm okay with them not sharing and just being the only person promoting, it's fine. But for the most part, you want to have access to their audience and their people. So there are very few of those that I do. But for the most part, because people are excited about being on the podcast, they are excited about sharing and telling their family and their friends that they're like, oh, I'm on this podcast, you should listen. And, that bumps listenership up as well. So having someone that's excited, that's comfortable with the picture that you might share, that's excited about what they shared and talked about is really key to getting people that endorse and will share the podcast promotional with their audiences. So now you know how to leverage podcast guests to grow your podcast and market it. If you want to learn more about podcast marketing strategies, we have an awesome playlist. Click the link in the description below to watch that, or click the image next to me to get access to that playlist. As always, thanks for watching. Keep podcasting.